Hello, everyone, and thank you, UN Women Australia, for inviting me to speak. The devastating and tragic floods and storms that have hit Queensland and New South Wales in the past week really reinforce the importance of the theme for International Women's Day this year: changing climates, equality for today for a sustainable tomorrow. I'd like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yugara as the First Nations owners of the lands where I stand today. I acknowledge the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within our community and the great deal we have to learn from their care for country and their sustainable practices. I want to start today with a quote from the Indian writer and activist Arundhati Roy. She wrote, "Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing." My hope today is that we can all hear that other world breathing. We can see her in our minds and move a little closer to her. We are living through two global revolutions: a gender revolution and a sustainability revolution. These great transformations, each as significant as the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution, have been running in parallel for 170 years. They are connected in many ways, and I believe they can each drive each other forward. To set the scene, let me take you back to the middle of the 19th century. Has anyone heard of a woman called Eunice Foote? Well, Foote was an American scientist, inventor, and feminist. She was a truly remarkable and inspiring woman. In 1948, Foote attended the famous Seneca Falls Convention, the first women's rights convention. She was fifth of 100 signatories, or 78 women, and 32 men that signed the Seneca Falls Declaration of Sentiments. I'll just show that on this slide. This was a landmark document demanding equal rights for women, including the right to vote. 8 years later, Foote attended the 8th annual meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science to present her scientific research. Her 2-page paper, also shown on the slide, was called "Circumstances Affecting the Heat of the Sun's Rays." It described experiments Foote had undertaken to gauge the effects of sunlight on different gases. She found that carbon dioxide heated up much more than the other gases she tested. She had discovered what we now call the greenhouse effect. Based on these experimental results, Foote speculated that an increase in carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere would raise the temperature of the planet. And I've circled a key passage from her paper for you to read here. She said, "An atmosphere of that gas would give to our Earth a high temperature, global warming, in other words." Foote saw the possibility of a hotter planet in past geological eras, but she could have also been describing the warmed up and still warming planet we live on today. She was the first person to foresee climate change. So some observations on Foote's story. First, her very participation in that conference was an achievement. There were very few female scientists in the 1850s, and the few there were faced many barriers. Though Foote was allowed to attend the conference, her groundbreaking paper was read on her behalf by a male professor, Joseph Henry. And you may not have heard of Foote because her contribution to science was only rediscovered 10 years ago. Her work had become a faint note in the history of science. Until recently, it was thought that the Irish scientist John Tyndall was the first person to discover the greenhouse effect. His experiments were more sophisticated and more conclusive than Foote's, but his work was published 3 years after hers. It's hard to wonder what else Foote would have discovered, what she would have achieved if she was given all of the opportunities, support and exposure that the male scientists of her time took for granted. So back to the present. We've come a long way in the past century and a half. Thanks to people like Eunice Foote, the lives of women and girls around the world have improved in so many ways. And our understanding of the environmental problems we have created has grown immensely. We should celebrate those breakthroughs and the individuals that created them. But we also have a right to be frustrated and disappointed with the pace of change. We are still a long way from a truly equal and sustainable world. To put it bluntly, we cannot wait another 170 years to complete the gender and sustainability revolutions. The problems are too urgent. The consequences of failure, or even progress that comes too slow, are dire. Today, I want to share with you my perspective on these two revolutions based on my experiences as an environmental scientist. So, I've always been fascinated by nature. I spent a lot of my childhood in North Queensland, next to and within the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area. Because I love nature, I wanted to protect it. So from the age of 10, with parental support, of course, I attended meetings of the World Wildlife Fund and Australian Conservation Foundation. At home, I sought ways to reduce my ecological footprint. At school, I was drawn to maths and science as subjects, and it never occurred to me in all of my schooling and higher education that science subjects or jobs were a male domain. Actually, I was blissfully unaware of gender stereotypes until later in life when I entered the world of work. My PhD took me to Cambridge to work with the United Nations Environment Programme, World Conservation Monitoring Centre, and then to Chile to analyse deforestation rates. My career has given me the opportunity to explore incredibly diverse environments like our beautiful Great Barrier Reef and the jungles of Borneo, to these really strange ecosystems known as universities. In recent years, while continuing my own research, I've held several leadership roles. My current role is Pro Vice Chancellor for Sustainability Strategy at QUT. Our goal is to be net zero by 2030 and drive sustainability through our research, education, policy, partnerships and operations. Sustainability is relevant to everything we do. We are making it a priority in every part of the university. So that's my life and career in 2 minutes. And I want to offer a few reflections on that. I wasn't born into a wealthy or well-connected family, but I've had support and opportunities that many women lack. And I've enjoyed many privileges that have enabled me to achieve what I have. First and foremost, the source of my privileges are that I'm a white, middle-class, heterosexual person whose first language is English. And I'm therefore comfortable and accepted in situations where, sadly, others aren't. In addition to that, I've always had healthy food, clean water and sanitation, and a safe and comfortable place to live. I've never experienced war or other violence, and I could always access any medical care I've needed. Now, these should all be givens. They're fundamental human rights. They're not luxuries. But so many women and girls around the world are deprived of them, and that deprivation harms and constrains them in so many ways. While I'm speaking here, I'm just going to show another slide that outlines these issues. So you can look at those slides, and I'll continue on with my story or my reflections. Moving now to education. So from primary school through to university, I've never seen any limits of what I could study or what I could aspire to. My own family valued education and encouraged me to attend university, even though my parents or my grandparents hadn't. And all of my education at every level has largely been free. I've always also had access to birth control, so I was able to choose whether and when I have children. My beautiful husband and I now have 2 beautiful boys, and we share the care of them equally. We've always been committed to and have lived in equal partnership. And this is no small thing. It's actually one of the biggest privileges of all, because even in countries like Australia, where women and men have equal political, legal, and economic rights, women's road to the top of their fields is far steeper than men's. And there are many reasons for this, including various kinds of conscious and unconscious bias and discrimination in the workplace. But one massive reason is that women, on average, are still doing far more of the caring and chores at home. And that limits their ability to take on extra projects, build networks, travel for work, and ultimately seek promotions. So part of the unfinished business of the gender revolution is for society to value the caring role of men, as well as their roles as providers and protectors. Unfortunately, old stereotypes do die hard. So I've spent most of my career in universities, and women actually outnumber men in Australian universities. Sorry. They make up 58% of the workforce and a similar percentage of the student body. But like most industries, men still hold more of the top jobs. Just a quarter of Australia's 43 universities are led by a female vice-chancellor. And I'm pleased to say that includes my boss at QUT, Professor Margaret Shield. The academic fields with the fewest women in senior positions are the STEM fields: science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medicine. So these are the fields we need to work the hardest in to attract, retain, develop, and promote women. Let me give you an example from the world of STEM. I'm also Deputy Director of a national research program called Securing Antarctica's Environmental Future. Now, what comes to mind when you think of Antarctic exploration and science? Or who comes to mind, I should say? Probably people who look like this. I'll just share an image here. Like many STEM fields, Antarctica has a very masculine history and reputation. Antarctica was discovered in 1820, but the first women didn't visit until 1935. And female scientists were prohibited from working in Antarctica until the 1950s. The situation has improved considerably since the 1980s. But the overall percentage of female expeditioners is still low in most countries, and just 24% of the Australian Antarctic program. Why is it so low? It's low because there are still many barriers to participation for women. Caring responsibilities mean that they can't easily leave and go head south for long trips. And there are even practical problems like a lack of suitable gear in women's sizes. And not unique to Antarctica is the occurrence of sexual discrimination, harassment, and assault in remote field locations. So when we started our research program a year ago, one of our first priorities before diving into the science was creating an equity, diversity, and inclusion plan. We have a clear plan to provide equal opportunities to all participants, while providing special support for women and other groups who are underrepresented in Antarctic science. Not every STEM field is like Antarctica, but quite a few are. And most universities recognise this and are doing something about it. At QUT, we have a range of gender equity programs that support all women. And we also provide support for male allies, knowing that it's not just about providing courses and training for women. We also collaborate with industry, government, and community partners to encourage women to participate in fields where females are underrepresented, including STEM, but also politics. For example, our Pathway to Politics program gives women that are interested in politics the support and the networks they need to get elected and thrive as political leaders. Several Pathway to Politics graduates have already stood for state and council elections. Another example, particularly relevant to today, is QUT's Business Schools partnership with UN Women Australia. Together, we provide study scholarships to aspiring female leaders in the public and private sectors. And QUT MBA students can join the annual UN Women Australia Trek for Human Rights, which last year raised money for Rohingya refugee women and girls in Bangladesh. So, why? Why does this all matter? Why should we care exactly how many scientists or politicians or business leaders or vice chancellors are women? Let me offer 3 reasons before I finish. First, greater diversity in the workforce brings more creativity and innovation, higher staff engagement, stronger financial performance, and a better reputation. Diversity and inclusion are good for business. We know this. Second is simple justice. Diversity and inclusion are morally right. Every individual and every group that has historically been sidelined or excluded should be allowed to do whatever work they want. And just as importantly, they shouldn't need to mask or mold their identities to fit in, to flourish, or rise to the top. Third, if we want a fighting chance of avoiding catastrophic climate change and ecological collapse, we need everyone we've got. We can't afford wasted potential. I said earlier that we are in the middle of 2 revolutions, a gender revolution and a sustainability revolution. Well, if you accelerate one, you will accelerate the other. The more women and girls around the world who have the privileges that I have, the more likely we are to solve the climate crisis. The more we address the climate crisis, the better the lives of everyone. I started with a quote, and I'll end with one also. The anthropologist Margaret Mead famously said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." I love this quote for its hope and its agency. It tells us we can make a difference. But I do want to amend it slightly. Yes, a small group can start to change the world, but to finish the change, we need many, many more. So I encourage you to think about what you can do through your work or your studies or within your family or community, or by supporting organisations like UN Women Australia. We all have a role to play. Thank you.